So let's take a look at one strong army list for every single faction in Warhammer 40k. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking 40k armies and army lists, and to have a closer look at how things are changing since the new balance update, let's take a look at just one example of a strong army list for each and every faction in the game. It's been just under 2 weeks now since Warhammer 40k's last major update, the balance data slate changing around a whole bunch of rules, lots of points being raised and lowered, and a few fairly fun detachments being added to different factions. Last weekend was the first major weekend where all that's been going live on the competitive scene. Not too many events were ready to take on the new rules after just a couple of days' notice, so I was certainly interested to take a look as to how good players were changing their lists and adapting things with all the big changes that happened. With that in mind, let's take a look at one successful army list for each faction since the balance update. Ideally for this one I was trying to find some of the ones that performed the best out of any of them. For the most part, where one existed, I tried to look at singles grand tournaments, armies that had gone 4 games to 1 loss and better. Though given it's just 1 weekend worth of event data, for a few factions I cast the net a little bit wider, taking a look at a couple of event winners for smaller 3-round tournaments, or some bigger ones that started with a 4-win and then 1 loss event record, even if the last round or two didn't go quite so well after that. For this one, it'll just be one example for each army, and it's quite early days at the moment with people experimenting and trying new stuff. These represent what one good player's managed to find some success with, but doesn't necessarily mean that it's the optimal thing or the only thing that you can take, though it's certainly interesting enough seeing a few armies and changes they might have made due to their codexes or balance changes. Let's get into it properly though, and first up we'll start with the Imperium. Firstly we have the Space Marines, with this army list by David Anderson placing second at the AZ Champions Cup with 6 wins to 1 loss to the first 5 unbeaten in a tournament of 104 players. This one's a Gladius Task Force list, though it's interesting that it doesn't include either Guilliman or Calgar. It seems that for Space Marines on the competitive scene it's generally been one or the other, if not both recently, though the balance update changes mean that you don't really want to run both at once anymore. Guilliman got a little toned down with his stratagem rules, though both of them remain very powerful models. I still expect most competitive lists to use one or the other. It's definitely cool and different to see none of them here and doing really well though. It's the Gladius Task Force and use for the different turns of advance and shoot and advance and charge, plus the big lance melee stratagem and reactive moves and things. Going through the list, and first up we've got a captain with Mastercrafted Bolter and Power Fist with the Honor Vehement for the extra AP and better melee damage. I'd guess he'd probably join the Assault Intercessors in the context of that Librarian being there with Fire Discipline, and that could give you a cheap fighty squad, a very punchy captain that gets some big rerolls against things on the central objectives, kind of similar enough to Blood Angels there. Looks like they could be jumping out of an Impulsor with Frag Storms and an Orbital Comms Array, interestingly enough. Then there's a Librarian with Fire Discipline, so that's a 4+ invulnerable save and sustained hits for the Stern Guard squad, so both tougher and shootier there. Looks like that unit's going to be riding in the Repulsor, so able to get in range and be able to jump back in after being charged, and they're just going to be a ridiculously punchy threat that's going to absolutely annihilate the Oath of Moment targets and might threaten to do more besides if there's multiple units nearby. Then there's a couple of lone characters, the Gravis Captain with the Artificer armor, with a 2+ save, a 5+ feel no pain, and his own half damage rule, tanky enough to run completely independently, and often used in Gladius lists for that, and the Combi Lieutenant for his reactive moves and utility purposes. One of the most common annoyance units includes in Space Marine armies in general. Then beyond that there's a whole bunch of Space Marine fire support, one Vindicator, a Repulsor Executioner with a Laser Destroyer, and a Gladiator Reaper. Quite nice if able to coordinate into their various optimal targets, and then a good amount of Space Marine small units for objective support and their good special rules, Scouts with Infiltrate and Return to Reserves, Infiltrators to deny deep strikes into the backfield, Incursors to spot targets, Inceptors with their close range drop that should be helpful for punching into the backfield if they need to, and 2 units of Jump Intercessors with Power Fist, nice cheap and fast moving utility units with Deep Strike. Overall it feels like quite a fun Space Marine list, really lots of variety here and nice to see something other than Guilliman and Calgar. Seems Space Marines at least have a few more options at the top levels of competitive play. Next up we've got the forces of the Imperial Guard, Astra Militarum having taken a few choice nerfs since the balance update. A few staples went up a bit, though it seems that someone's managed to win a grand tournament with something that's anything but meta, taking the lesser played Recon Element detachment, which is basically the one that makes infantry annoying to kill and survivable, getting the benefit of cover, interfering with enemy shooting with courageous diversions, return to reserve, and potentially confounding enemy charge moves with Tanglefoot grenades. Reactive moves could also be a really big deal for keeping squads safe. It seems that Wesley St. Hines has managed to use this to take first at Old Guard Games Grand Tournament, 5-0 at a 42-player event, and it is putting down a pretty spectacular amount of infantry on the tabletop. 4 units of 20 Cadian shock troops, and it looks like 3 of those have Cadian Castellans and Cadian command squads in them, so lots of guardsman bodies, a little bit more threat, and orders absolutely everywhere. They'll be a bit unusually dangerous with their damage output as well, with the Castellans around. There's also Ursula Creed attaching to one unit. I guess she'd probably body up with a command squad, which might mean that one might have to attach elsewhere. Still seems that she makes the cut despite the 20-point increase for her discount stratagems and big orders. Then there's 70 Death Corps infantry, one big unit of 20 of them, and then 5 units of 10. They have their regeneration for their squad med packs, and a bit of special weapon threat with melter and plasma guns that gets better as the squad gets damaged. To scrap for the midfield and be expendable earlier, there's 3 sets of 10 Kazachan jungle fighters, and then there's a good amount of cavalry to back it up that can also use some of the options from the detachment. One big unit of 10 Rough Riders for a massive countercharge there. 2 small units of 5 of them, and then interestingly 1 unit of Death Riders, which is kind of fun. They're rarely played in competitive games. I suppose they did drop down a tiny bit though. Finally there's Gaunt's Ghost that can help out both with orders and jumping around the board doing objectives, and definitely fit in well with the theme of the army list. Overall looks like an army that would just go all out for board control and stopping the enemy army from scoring. Looks like all the scores scored were consistently high. Certainly seems that with all those OC bodies and the detachment tricks to keep the infantry safe for as long as possible, it'd be a force that would do really quite well on the primary game. Maybe the big downside being a bunch of targets that these special weapons aren't crazily effective against, even if the cavalry and those big Cadian units could counterpunch fairly well. Very cool to see a big victory for Foot Guard like this though. Next up we've got the Golden Guardians of the Adeptus Custodes, and this list by Marcus Johnson placed second at Battle Ready Wargaming Road to Nova, which was a 53 player tournament, and this went undefeated. This one's using the Lines of the Emperor detachment, the one with the big +1 to wound buff when you're not too near other fellow custodians, some good relics for shield captains in particular, and some very nice stratagems for supporting units skirmishing on the mid-board objectives, and quite a good character one for using their once per game ability twice. Making good use of that, I'm sure, is Trajan Valoris, who can use that on the moment shackle for 2 enormous turns worth of damage dealing. That certainly makes him more tempting in these lists. I'd guess he's probably going alongside a unit of Wardens, and he's joined by 2 Blade Champions that would join the other 2 units. The Wardens have their -1 to wound and their big turn worth of Feel No Pain. So you get units that are both unusually tanky and still very, very dangerous, and the Blade Champions can have a big boosted turn of speed to get into combat once per game. Then there's Inquisitor Draxus with a unit of Custodian Guard. They get their double shoot and their reroll wound rolls if on objectives, and between that and her fairly punchy shooting attacks, you can have a surprisingly mighty amount of damage in the shooting phase, and she can also shield them from being shot at long range as well. And for the last of the HQ section, there's a shield captain on Dawn Eagle Jetbike. That one takes a salvo launcher and a Mod Immortis, the big melee boost one, and it looks like they'd join a unit of Virtus Praetors also with salvo launchers for a pretty fast moving and mighty unit that you could also draw back from combat once per game. Finally, for the Custodians themselves, there's a single unit of Venatari Custodians with Lancers, free rapid ingress to jump down and then charge and kill something with extreme prejudice with a +1 to wound, and then some objective support in 1 unit of 5 Prosecutors and 2 units of Witch Seekers. Overall looks like a pretty solid and scary example of what the Lines of the Emperor can do. Interesting to see no Alaris Terminators in this one though. I feel like I've seen those quite a lot in other lists, and they did drop by 5 points in the balance updates, making them a bit more efficient. Before we move on to the other army list of the Imperium and beyond, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in Warhammer Combat Cards. They're a Warhammer 40,000 themed strategy mobile game, and the idea is that you build a deck of cards themed around different factions and armies from the setting, fighting them in fairly straightforward runs of short battles against rival decks. The idea is that you unlock the cards, level them up so they perform better, and unlock more builds that you can try and develop. These things are basically a reimagination of an old Citadel card game from the 1980s, basically aiming to do this but in the digital age. To build a deck of cards, you have a points cost on the top left up to a limit, and you've got the other stats for their health and their range and melee damage, and each card has a special ability as well, for example this Reaver gaining fear and debuffing the damage of enemy cards opposite them. When you play with them in a game, it's a 3 versus 3 little battle like this, with the rest held in reserve. You pick a Warlord that will have a big effect as to how the deck plays, such as say Abaddon the Despoiler giving you +7 damage to all your cards, or Deathwatch Captain Artemis damaging a random card when you deploy cards. Usually the idea of building decks is to maximise the Warlord's boost. All the cards attack in sequence, choosing range, psychic and melee, so it makes sense to build around one damage type and try and match up certain ones against each other to make them destroy things efficiently. In any case, feel free to check them out, links down in the video description if any of that sounds interesting to you. There's a reward code, the Red, that gives you 40 Chaos cards and a bunch of in-game currency, if you did want to check it out. And for those interested, I'll talk through a few of the pros and cons and my opinions on it at the end of the video. Thanks to them for sponsoring this one in any case. Moving on though, and next up we have the Sisters of Battle. They were one of the armies that got the most improvements in the last update, lots of useful units that were already good getting better. It does seem a few people have had some success with them, one of the most notable being Brendan McKenzie placing 20th at the Edmonton Open, a huge 250 player tournament going 7-1. This one's using the ever-popular Hallowed Martyrs detachment, the one focusing on sacrifices and characters, and in particular having that stratagem to resurrect a character when they're slain, and there's a pretty awesome roster of characters to be able to use that on in this one. So likely going to get some good value out of that stratagem, particularly as you don't need to use the miracle dice for it anymore. There's plenty of other good stuff as well though, including that nasty melee trick where you make the enemy have to target all their attacks into one of your expendable units. Going through that enormous character roster though, first up we've got Morven Val with a trio of Paragon Warsuits, perhaps one of the highest characters to res for a command point when they get slain, and likely to tear a massive hole in the enemy army before they go down. There's then the Lone Operative Demonifuge, Ephrael Stern and Carganil providing some interesting Lone Operative skirmishing. Junith Arita farming up some command points. I'm not sure if she'll be joining half of the Battle Sister squad or going solo. Interesting to see the Triumph of St. Catherine back in action. 235 points didn't feel like an enormous decrease to me, but it gives some generation of Miracle Dice to be 6s, and then some really quite interesting buffs that can affect a wide area. There's then no less than 3 Canonesses, at least some of which must be running solo. There's 2 with Chainswords and Null Rods. Maybe could be expendable units for melee shenanigans perhaps. One with a Blessed Blade and Saintly Example, a bit more fighty, maybe could be a good enough fit for the Sacrosanct. A Palatine with Through Suffering Strength, again could be reasonable enough for lethal hits for the Sacrosancts, and again not impossible to go solo either in this detachment. Finally there's a lone and expendable Dialogus. For the actual squads there's a single unit of Battle Sisters equipped with the Melter weapons, they'll be split by that Immolator, to have one squad to guard the home objective and then have some venture forward likely with a character. And a Rhino that seems like it'd want to transport those Celestian Sacrosancts. They take a bunch of Halberds and the Inferno Pistol, and then some combination of the characters. Then there's a squad of 5 Seraphim with Hand Flamers, able to do their move shoot move shenanigans, and just put a fair amount of strength 4 hits out onto light units anyway. And finally a Castigator with a Battle Cannon, with general purpose heavy bolter fire support and some ignored cover and damage 3 on the Battle Cannon, that can mark units for extra AP against them. Kind of fun to see these Sisters of Battle doing Hero Hammer like this. I feel like some of the elements are obvious to use, some of them a bit less so from just reading over the list itself. Certainly strikes me as the technical kind of thing that's probably going to do well in the hands of the player that knows it, but not a more obvious list to average players out there. Next up we've got the Knights of Titan. This army list by a Matt Huber, using it to take 7th at the AC Champions Cup, again 6 wins to 1 loss in a big 100 plus player tournament. Grey Knights didn't really get any enormous balance changes last time around, and this one again uses their Warpbane Task Force, the one where you get the big rerolls to hit in their zones of control. That one usually all very efficient for Dread Knights, though it's also built around Purifiers. I feel like I've seen really quite a lot of versions of this list that go heavy on the Dread Knights and other things, but maybe not even take any Purifiers in occasional versions of this. So it's cool to see something playing into the theme of the detachment. This one just goes very, very heavy on them. There's 2 units of 10 and 1 unit of 5. No Castellan Crow in this one, and they'll be able to provide the big auras of rerolls to hit, and can be used to deliver units to close range charges as well, dropping them down to deliver something else. There's a few damage dealer stratagems that can be extra nasty on mass units of those too. Otherwise there's still 4 Dread Knights. They all take the Incinerator Side Cannon and Hammer loadout, and one of them's a Grandmaster. Still the best way to be dealing with tough tanks and vehicles given the rerolls in this detachment. It seems there's also a Tech Marine to help them become more dangerous and repair a few wounds if you can keep up. Finally there's 2 strike squads with Stormbolters for some sticky objectives goodness, 1 squad of the fast moving Interceptors that got cheaper in the previous update, and then also a Calidus Assassin joining the Grey Knights for yet another unit that can bounce around the board doing secondary objectives and potentially do some command point disruption things if that matters big. Quite nice to see a list go quite so heavy on the Purifiers. Definitely opens up a fair few more options with the use of the stratagems more reliably. Those 10 ones do look rather murderous, dropping in somewhere and roasting something between their side flame attacks and potentially melee, with 4 rerolls to wound for 1 command point. Next up we've got the Adeptus Mechanicus, an army that hadn't been doing particularly stand out in the win rates and things prior to the update. They did get a few nice enough adjustments, including a cheaper Scorpius tank and the Castellan robots always getting their Doctriners now. One list that did pretty well was this Halo Screed Battleclade one played by Keegan Marshall, placing in the upper 5th of Games Workshop's Edmonton Open. Looks like the eventual run was 5-3, but it was a 4-1 initial run. So if it was played as a more normal sized grand tournament, it would have been a more obviously impressive record. The Halo Screed detachment is the one where you get to nominate several units to be your Halo units, getting things like Advance and Charge, Stealth or Boosted Movement, and then some pretty nice stratagems to support most of the things in the Admech army. You can make a super shooty Cataphrone Breacher unit with a whole bunch of rerolls. There's a reactive move one and a fallback shoot and charge one. It's quite well liked as it helps to support multiple elements of the army a bit better than some of the Codex detachments. Leading the way is the very cheap Belisarius Core. He's just got fairly chunky stats for the cost now, plus some helpful simple auras to make your units tougher against shooting and reroll ones to hit. There's a Cybernetica Datasmith, leading a big squad of the 4 Castellan robots. There'll always be Halo Override units with the enhancement, and now they have the Doctrina Imperatives all the time, so they got a fair bit more efficient due to that enhancement costing cheaper. There's a Skitarian Marshal who can give some rerolls for his unit unless he's just doing lone character things or something. And a Tech Priest Manipulus that can join the Cataphrone Breachers with his Sanctified Ordnance, giving them lethal hits and an extra boost of range, and there's multiple good stratagems that can help that unit's damage output in this detachment. That squad of 6 of them certainly looks super dangerous until they're dealt with. For Battle Line troops, there's 1 unit of Rangers and then 2 units of Vanguard, helping out all the Doctrinas of the things nearby, and particularly the hit rerolls of those Cataphrone Breachers. There's a unit of the Taraxi Skystalkers that will be nice to jump around doing secondary objectives, a unit of Infiltrators to take the midfield with their Taser Goads, a unit of Rust Stalkers. They're pretty awesome objective skirmishers here, and can have easy access to advance and charge if that makes sense for them. The Castellan robots take 1 fist and then dual heavy phosphor blasters beyond that. Pretty punchy with, say, extra AP from the Conqueror Doctrina. There's 2 big and shooty onagers with the neutron lasers for some dedicated anti-tank, and a Scorpius Disintegrator that got a little bit cheaper to back them up. Fairly serious anti-tank firepower there. And then finally 1 Dragoon with the Taser Lance, a nice skirmishing outrider with good stats for the cost. Seems like a pretty solid and well balanced Halo Screed list. Feels like I haven't been seeing quite so many people using the Onagers versus the Scorpius tanks recently, though clearly they can still do well even if on paper the Scorpius tanks gain more ground on them. Next up we have the Imperial Knights, who are certainly waiting for their codex at this point. Games Workshop teased it in early 2025, but now seems to be significantly after the Chaos one. In the meantime though, the Knights have generally been pretty powerful, particularly with the Armiger Warglaves and Helverins dropping down 10 points, and meaning that quite a lot of armies are basically building around them and maybe just Canis Rex now. This list played by Philcast was used to take first at Falcon, Live Free or Fly Hard, winning all 5 of its games in a 63-player tournament. This one's one of the Canis Rex and the Armiger style lists. Canis Rex is the Warlord with the big centerpiece knight with the free stratagems and pretty massive damage stats between the hitting on 2s and the big sustained hits, all helped out further with the lay low, the tyrant rerolls, and everything here gets a 6+ feel no pain for the noble lance. Then he's backed up by 6 of the Armiger Warglaves, fast moving and some really good anti-tank shooting and nicely general purpose melee, but also fairly fast and high OC battle line units to move on to primary objectives and can be doing secondaries if they're needed to. They're backed up by 4 Helverins with the autocannons. They're quite nice with the extra AP stratagem that they can get when they're focusing down 1 target, and can be extra nasty against certain fly targets, wounding them on a 2+. Then finally, to back them up and do a little bit of scoring, there's a Calidus Assassin bouncing around the board and a Calexis Assassin with the close range drop. The Calexis might be able to contribute towards stopping the enemy from scoring primary quite so well if they can get in range of the home objective and do the battle shock thing. The Imperial Knight Codex released seems odds on to be not too far away in the future, and if the Chaos ones are anything to judge by, it looks like they're going to have some quite big changes to their stat lines. Big guys dropping down to toughness 11 but with more wounds and potentially fewer points, and another 3 different detachments to play with. Certainly looks like they're in for a good time until then though. Next up we've got the Blood Angels, and for all their massive points decreases, it doesn't really seem like they've had a super standout week on the tournament performance. Sort of middling win rates and no big event wins yet, though it certainly seems that massive people are playing them. Most people seem to be using Liberator Assault Group still, though this one's an Angelic Inheritors list, the Grotzmus detachment, played by Noah Neundorfer, and this came in at 8th at the Road to Nova tournament, with 4 wins to 1 loss. Angelic Inheritors is the one that buffs character units. They can all reroll 1s to hit and wound, and then either get fallback, shoot and charge, or reroll advance and charge rolls. And they've got quite a few nice stratagems as well, including being able to turn off shooting at greater than 18 inches, lance and lethal hits for character units to allow them to punch up, a return to reserves one that the Sanguinor can even use within engagement range, and a sustained hits shooting one. As you'd expect, this one goes incredibly character heavy. There's both Mephiston and the Sanguinor on the board for some of the Fight First Lone Operative goodness. Mephiston got significantly better in the balance update, dropping down 15 points. Then there's 3 Sanguinary Guard units, 3 sets of 3 of them with the blades, one of them led by Dante and the other 2 by jump captains with power fists and hand flamers. Everything in that got just absolutely enormously cheaper. And again, I think it would be more surprising if you didn't see 3 units of Sanguinary Guard at the points cost that they are. Then there's a unit of Inceptors dropping in close with Plasma. I guess you could use the sustained hits one if it made sense to. 2 Vindicators to line up some big punchy anti-tank damage dealing for some ranged threats to help out the assault stuff. And then interestingly, there's a Desolation squad that looks like they've got an Apothecary attached to them. I guess that indirect fire was literally considered interesting enough, just literally with the reroll ones to hit and wound with the detachment buff. And later in the game, they could step up to super crack something directly. Finally, there's a unit of Intercessors for some sticky objectives, and Infiltrators to deny some deep strike. This one certainly looks like a tricky list to get to grips with. A lot of stuff that might well be hiding or jumping around to hit you first, but still with some massive counterpunches with those Vindicators, and any one of those character-led Sanguinary Guard squads will hit very hard indeed. Next up, we've got the Dark Angels. This one by Adrian Nicola was used to place 40th at the Edmonton Open, the big Games Workshop tournament. The eventual score was 5-3. That looks like he started out with an initial 5-1 run, so it would have been equivalent to that kind of achievement if it was a 6-round tournament. It looks like lots and lots of Dark Angels players were trying out the Wrath of the Rock detachment, though at least so far they don't look like they've had loads of success with it. It seems that Gladius did well for the Dark Angels here with the big movement buffs. Generally prior to the Data Slate detachment coming out, most people tended to either play Gladius or Stormlands. I'm sure lots of people were keen to check out the new one for its durability buffs for infantry and things. Having access to Advance and Charge just really helps Dark Angels, in particular with those Deathwing Knights though. It seems that the changes to the Lion were tempting enough to make him part of the army. He's still a very, very dangerous fights first melee monster, but now has options to return to reserves. It's -1 to wound when high strength things target him, and has a particularly good melee buff as well that can make his own damage get extra nasty if he needs to. It seems that commanding alongside we've got Grandmaster Azrael, and he's leading a big squad of 10 Stern Guard. They look like they'll get on quite well with him on paper. A 4+ invulnerable save and the sustained hits to make their shooting extra nasty. Between their shooting and melee, if they point themselves at the Oath of Movement targets, they're just going to absolutely wreck it. Definitely a more unusual way to run Azrael though. Lots like to keep him cheap with Intercessors of one flavour or another, or maybe go Inner Circle Companions or Hellblasters. The Combi Weapon Lieutenant is here for some lone operative annoyance factor. There's 2 punchy units of Deathwing Knights that are enormously hard to kill with their 4 wounds and -1 damage, and they're equipped with the maces that will do well both against infantry and against monsters and vehicles. There's Jump Intercessors for skirmishing and secondary objectives, Infiltrators to deny deep strike to the home board, an expendable Invader ATV that you could push out to do screening things in the midboard, and that has a multi-melter, and 5 scouts that could be used for a similar role and push enemy infiltrators and scouts back. Finally though, all that's backed up with some serious anti-tank firepower, not 1 but 3 Gladiator Lancers here. That's going to be enough to give enemy armoured lists a really big think as to how aggressively they want to push against the Dark Angel stuff. Lots of very nasty firepower that doesn't need Oath of Moment to help it. It maybe doesn't really feel too surprising to see the Lion on the table after those changes. Hopefully some people manage to make the new detachment work in a big way. Will be cool to see if anyone gets some big results with that down the line. Next up we've got the Black Templars, and they had a few small boosts from the last update. They've currently been in really quite a bad spot, though Helbrecht's Grimaldus and their Sword Brethren dropping down all seemed helpful. Black Templars don't have the most enormous player base in the world, and I struggle to find high placings for them at big tournaments. I did notice this one by Brendan Roy, who used it to take first at Game Garrison June RTT, a 3-round tournament of 23 players. They're definitely really quite a different feeling Black Templar list to average ones that you might see. Using Gladius Task Force once again here. I guess between Advance and Charge and the Lance stratagem, that's pretty helpful for melee things, as well as having shooting support. The list is led by 4 melee characters, the now cheaper High Marshal Helbrecht, the Emperor's Champion, a Castellan with Combi Weapon and Power Weapon, and a Marshal with Mastercrafted Power Weapon and Plasma Pistol, and he's taking the Honor Vehement, the one that gets you extra attacks and strength and more in the Assault Doctrine. Between those, it looks like they lead 3 of the units, 2 sets of Sword Brethren, and then 1 squad of Assault Intercessors. I guess he'd have some options as to what attaches to what. I guess it could be the Marshal with the Assault Intercessors to get the rerolls on his big go turn, and Helbrecht seems best with the Sword Brethren given that they've synergised nicely. The Emperor's Champion could go with the other maybe. Castellan could go with Helbrecht as well to make a ridiculously fighty squad. It does feel like there's a few options here. In any case, those 3 scary units all pile into 3 Templar Impulsors. They have the Shield Dome, a Multi-Melter and some Fragstorm grenade launchers, and they can be some battlefield bunkers to charge out of and wreck something. It's kind of interesting to see that there's a Land Raider Redeemer as well. With the 3 Impulsors, it kind of implies that the 3 scary squads go in those as opposed to that. But that could be another good way to deliver things to melee, unless it's transporting the Devastator Centurions into good lines of sight and playing them super aggressively. There's a squad of 3 of those that have some really nice damage output between missiles and las cannons that get big rerolls against objectives. They tend to see kind of limited play in competitive armies though, just due to lack of mobility outside of Vanguard. To back them up on the anti-tank front, there's a couple of Templar Gladiator Lancers, so they get the bolt-on multi-melters, as well as the big hitting firepower with rerolls. And then there's some objective and secondary support units, a unit of scouts to do screening things, a combi lieutenant, and a Calatus assassin jumping on and off the board doing secondaries, or maybe messing with enemy stratagems. Certainly a pretty different list to Templars normally there. Interesting to see a different take on them. I'd guess that most players will still be using the Righteous Crusaders, though I do suspect that Helbrecht and some Sword Brethren seem fairly auto-include since they've reduced in points. Next up we've got the Space Wolves, and they're sort of in Codex limbo on the competitive scene at the moment. They've had their book come out in the army set, and Games Workshop has released some Codex points for it, but generally advising people not to use them in big tournaments until the actual main release of the Codex has come out. So as a result, there's not too many people playing them in grand tournaments, and most of the ones that are using their index rules. Having a look through a few lists though, again there was another RTT that seemed to allow new Codex points and rules, and that was won by a Space Wolves player. There was this list by Dan Bruce that went 3-0 undefeated. Interestingly enough, this one was with Ironstorm Spearhead, I guess building around those Iron Priests with their fairly crazy buffing rule of giving weapons the rapid fire keyword. That means that you can get some fairly ridiculously efficient Space Wolf anti-tank shooting on the go. It seemed like Ballistas, Dreadnoughts, Predator Annihilators, or maybe Repulsor Executioners could be some of the most interesting things. This one's gone for 2 Iron Priests, one with the target augury web, 2 Ballistas Dreadnoughts, and 2 Annihilators. Kind of crazy to think that they're getting 6 las cannon shots, not 3 at half range. Then a fair bit of the rest of the list has tried out just one of a whole bunch of different units. There's Bjorn the Fell-Handed with a Hellfrost cannon, who I guess will also like the vehicle support and single rerolls of the Ironstorm Spearhead. That might be mainly aimed for the other vehicles though. There's Logan Grimnar, who looks like he'd be leading a squad of Wolfguard Terminators with power weapons and storm shields. They could first turn Deep Strike if desired to get to a threatening spot. There's then a Wolfguard Battle Leader who looks like he's going with a squad of 3 Wolfguard Head Takers, and a Combi Weapon Lieutenant for objective support alongside a squad of Fenrisian Wolves. The Combi Weapon Lieutenant is unusually hard to kill with the Flesh is Weak enhancement. Then for further threats, there's 2 units of 3 of the new Thunderwolf profile, just 100 points for 3 big chunky wolves with some fairly nasty damage on the charge. And then finally there's an interesting damage dealer choice for the Ironstorm with 2 squads of 5 Hellblasters, each piled into an Impulsor. The Impulsors with Shield Dome and Storm Bolters. I've not really seen them used all that often in Ironstorm Spearhead that way. I guess that when the Codex does start to hit tournaments, most people will be going for the actual Codex detachments. They're interesting to see an Ironstorm interpretation here. The Iron Priests certainly add a pretty huge amount of damage to any one vehicle. Finally, for the Divergent Chapter Space Marines, we've got the Deathwatch, and again for a faction without too many players. I didn't find any great examples of one standout placing list on the first weekend. I did notice there was one from the Leeds team tournament here though, run by Brendan Roy, who went undefeated. A bit of a different thing given there's some strategy with pairings and matchups, but at team tournaments you're certainly likely to run into good players doing their best. As ever with the Deathwatch, they're using their Black Spear Task Force, so the multiple different turns worth of damage boosting and the special issue ammo stratagems, and stratagems to flex out the mission tactics or teleport things around the board with their teleportarium. The list basically looks like it's got 5 enormous kill team threats with good character support, and it's backed up by a couple of combi weapon lieutenants. Interesting to see 2 of them for their lone operative shenanigans, and then a squad of intercessors to sticky the home field I guess. Going through the kill teams, there's 2 sets of the Indomitor ones, so they're the big chunky Gravis ones that get the strength bonus, and their bolt rifles have better AP and things anyway. They take the Bolt Storm Aggressors and the Eradicators with a multi-melter, and one of those squads is led by a Gravis captain, all very helpful for the discounted stratagems, and he also takes the Tome of Ectoclades for the double Oath of Moment. Then there's 2 Rhinos looking like they've got 10 Deathwatch veterans in each of them. One of the squads is one big singular squad, and then one split down into 2 smaller squads of 5. Generally going big on the heavy Thunderhammers. The 2 small squads are specced for melee combat, and the big one takes a couple of frag cannons as well. One of the units will be led by a Watchmaster, again with options for discounted stratagems, and another one is led by the Judas here with the Thief of Secrets, so his squad will be fighting first, and with an enormously boosted melee profile as well. Finally, there's 2 squads of the Deathwatch Terminators, very efficient small units that also get the kill team keyword, and they can blaze away with a bunch of Cyclone missile launchers when they drop down, and have power fists so they're no slouch in melee either. Doesn't seem like any enormous changes from the Deathwatch list here compared with their norm, but it's not like they had any big changes on the balanced data slate front either. Lots of scary Space Marines in power armor with big damage and nice stratagems to get them where they need to be. Finally for the Imperium, and as ever struggling quite a lot, are the Imperial Agents. They're a faction that's needed some major help for a long time, and Games Workshop don't seem to be particularly inclined to try and make them good. For a strong list for them, I've had to go back away, though it's not like their points have changed since the balanced data slate unfortunately. This one from a couple of months ago was run by Joseph Salt, who used it to take second at Bedlam in the Burg, going 4 wins to 1 loss with the Imperialist fleet, the Agents detachment that can either allow you to go for 1 objective or 1 enemy unit with a nice buff, and has some good stratagems for movement manipulation and interesting ways to deploy with the enhancements. Generally the way that it tends to win is by big board control and having a whole load of units that just don't really deal all that much damage but certainly get in the way and might be able to run off with all the objectives before the opponent can stop them. It's really quite a high model count army, and most of them with at least fairly good saves. There's 3 units of 10 of the Arbites Subductors. They're the ones with a 3+ save and the 4+ invulnerable, which are very hard to kill for the cost. There's 2 squads of Sisters of Battle, looking like they'll be broken in half by the Immolators. They have sticky objectives and can bring a bit of Meltify to the table as well. There's 3 squads of the Navy Breachers, one of which could be infiltrated with the Rogue Trader entourage if they wanted. Potentially with that you could have a unit that could screen out a whole bunch of the enemy army and pin them back if it made sense, and several of the detachment stratagems work better on the Navy units. Finally, there's 2 sets of 12 Inquisitorial Agents. They take Servitors with multi-melters and load into those Chimeras, it would seem. They'd be somewhat annoying general purpose threats with again a fair bit of OC, and I'd guess might be joined by some of the Inquisitors. There's also a couple of Rhinos as well, and they could be used to transport the Subductors about, or some of the Navy Breachers. Then to lead and support all that, there's a couple of Assassins, the lone operatives for the Eversor and Vindicare, and you could potentially swap them out to other ones if it made more sense as per the army that you were engaging. 1 Navigator who might be fielded alone for his deep strike denial. Inquisitor Draxus with her firepower and turning off shooting at longer range. She's easy enough to include with her cheap points cost for agents, and 2 Inquisitors bearing enhancements, one with clandestine operation to infiltrate some units, and one with digital weapons for a tiny bit more punch. You definitely need some good terrain on the board and some skill to make this one work, being all about controlling the board and sacrificing units for points all game long, maybe doing a little bit of damage against the things that matter the most, but for the most part just trying to outscore the opponent as they gradually grind through the army. As ever, it would certainly be nice to see Games Workshop provide some more support for the Imperial Agents, as there's definitely options they could go down if they wanted to make them a more functional and enjoyable army. Let's get on to the Forces of Chaos though, and it seems like Chaos armies in general are just having an absolutely great time at the moment. Particularly the Deity Legion seem to be going well, Chaos Marines themselves got some nice buffs, Chaos Knights got a bunch of interesting things, and Demons remain strong. First up for the standard Heretic Astartes themselves, this list by Deckers was used to take first at the Iberian Ham GT, winning a 41-player tournament going 5 games undefeated. This one's using the nice and general purpose Renegade Raiders, able to advance and shoot and to get extra AP against objectives, with some nice things for manipulating melee with fallbacks, advance and charge, and some damage buffs after getting out of transports. Talking of the transports, it looks like there's 2 Rhinos loaded up with some Chaos Space Marine melee, 1 squad of Chosen with their fairly big punchy stat lines. I guess it might be Fabius Bile leading them. He does well with his augmentations to make an already beefy unit yet more threatening. The other Rhino looks like it's got options. There's 2 sets of 5 Noise Marines here with their Blastmasters, and they'd certainly like the extra AP buff that the detachment can give them. I guess they might be in the other Rhino, and they could certainly deliver a massive shooting punch. The other option would be a small squad of Legionaries that looks like he's got a Chaos Lord attached to them. A nice punchy threat to throw at something on objectives. The Legionaries giving the Chaos Lord rerolls to wound with his big hitting damage, particularly on his go turn. He could allow them to use that advance and charge stratagem for free as well. Otherwise for mainline damage dealing, there's 3 Chaos Predator Destructors with the autocannons and then the las cannons. The autocannons in this one particularly like firing at the mid-board objectives with enemies on them, and Dark Pacts for sustained hits doesn't go amiss either. Then it's fun to see the return of the Lord Discordant in this one. Seems that the big datasheet buffs were good enough to make them tempting, still far better against vehicles with their special rules, but they're certainly more general purpose a melee threat with their strength 8 and damage 3 things, and more likely to make it into melee with their 14-inch movement. Then beyond that there's a whole bunch of chaff objective support, Cypher with his lone operative shenanigans and ability to counterattack a medium infantry squad rather hard. Some cheap Chaos Bikers that have nice stats for the cost and move quickly and are fairly expendable. A similar sort of thing with the Raptors, but are able to go across terrain and deep strike. 2 sets of Cultists with their sticky objectives, and then some Demon support with some infiltrating Nurglings and a scouting Beast of Nurgle. Looks very well rounded and interesting to see a few of the more unusual things here. Noise Marines plus extra AP does seem nice on paper, though they did go up in points recently. And pretty cool to see a Lord Discordant in a competitive list that's actually won a tournament. That certainly wouldn't have been the case prior to the balance update. Next up we've got the Death Guard, perhaps the current big bad of Warhammer 40k. Doing really well prior to the balance update and no adjustments made there. Still looks like they're winning a massive amount of events. Seems like they added another 4 or 5 grand tournaments to the pile over the past weekend, including the 80 Champions Cup and 104 player tournament, which was won by Derek Apshey of 40k Dirtbags. I'm sure you can find more about his thinking on Death Guard if you check him out on YouTube. His list used the standard play company, the Virulent Vectorium, the one with the sticky objectives and the -1 damage stratagem, and it has some pretty nice support for Mortarion as well, who is present in this one. The ability to drain a whole bunch of health from an enemy that tries to destroy him and falls short does seem like quite a powerful swing on paper. Mortarion can move forward and is incredibly tough, will cause things to die nearby with his mortal wounds, and also has good damage in combat now, particularly with his sweep profile. His reactive move potential can be quite a big deal too. Then there's 2 squads of those scary Death Shroud Terminators, dropping in at 6 inches against something that's afflicted, each of those led by a Lord of Contagion, one with Furnace of Plagues and one with a Demon Weapon, the 2 good damage dealer enhancements for this. They'll give their units lance and sustained hits. That means they should be taking an enormous chunk out of anything that they contact between the Contagion debuffs, which could give them some extra AP as well. In general, they're going to be very hard to stop them getting into something important and wrecking it. Then there's a Demon Prince of Nurgle with the Revolting Regeneration. That gives him a 5+ Feel No Pain, which is very nice on top of his Toughness 12 profile. He can help shield models nearby from enemy fire and give them free stratagems. Then there's 2 squads of Plague Marines inside a Rhino, extra nasty shooting from them, and one is slightly more spec for melee than the other. One of them will be led by a Foul Blightspawn for his damage dealing and potentially fights first as well. I guess the Tallyman could lead the other one, though I wouldn't be too surprised if he's just running solo, farming command points on his own in the backfield somewhere. There's a squad of Chaos Spawn that can scout up the board and be a nuisance unit, 2 squads of 10 Poxwalkers for infiltrating and putting things in affliction range early. Looks like there's Typhus himself just completely dropping on his own in this one. He can be nice enough to do secondary objectives with, and with his big mortal wound damage output, he can very viably just run off his own stats. And then just a small amount of armoured demon engine support with this one, only 2 bloat drones with heavy blight launchers, which compared with most Death Guard lists is 1 less than normal. As ever, masses of scary stuff from the Death Guard there. Lots of good ways that they seem to be having success at the moment. I guess this one building around Mortarion and going light on the demonic firepower. Next up, we've got the Thousand Suns, and their new codex seems to be doing really well for them. There are lots and lots of top placing lists available for them. One of the higher placing ones was this one by TJ Lanigan, placing 3rd at that same tournament, the first 6 games going unbeaten and just losing the last one it seems. The Thousand Suns now have their redone Kabbalistic rituals, which can boost shooting in quite a big way, and still have Doombolt and double moves options. This one's running the Grand Coven, so boosting magical firepower on 3 different turns, then some good stratagem support on top of that, cancelling a damage, a sticky objective one, the chance to reroll psychic tests, and the big devastating sorcery one, which could be alright on Magnus potentially. The Primarch himself is here in the list, and he can certainly use the devastating sorcery buffs rather well. He'll be very helpful for getting Kabbalistic rituals cast reliably. Then there's 2 Exalted Sorcerers on discs, likely joining the Zangor Enlightened with the Great Bows if I had to guess. I've forgotten that they were able to join the disc units now when I last talked about Thousand Suns. One has Encandium for an extra use of Doombolt once per game and some more mortal wounds. And then there's 2 Infernal Masters looking like they're going to be joining the Rubric Marines. One with the Umbralific Crystal to teleport the squads around the board, and one taking the Damage Enhancement Relic with +1 strength and damage, very nasty on their big hitting Torrent Fire, particularly with the Rubric Marine rerolls added in, and maybe even devastating wounds from the Detachment rule. Both of those units will be able to push enemies off objectives in the mid-board very hard indeed, the Rubrics with their Mass Warp Flamers and Soul Reaper cannons. Then this one goes super heavy on the Zangor Enlightened. 3 units of 6 with the Great Bows are just excellent units for 80 points. Pretty reasonable on the damage and defense, let alone their good utility value with their reactive moves. What seems to be a little bit less common are the regular Zangor Enlightened, so the more melee and spear configured ones. There's 3 units of 3 as small interference units. There's a squad of 10 scouting Zangors with the blades. They're able to return to reserves. And then finally, for a bit of raw muscle at the centre of the list, there's not 1 but 3 Mutalith Vortex Beasts. Some pretty scary Vortex firepower there, particularly when buffed by the Kabbalistic ritual buffs. Those Lance profiles in particular being very nasty at taking out tanks. Again, Thousand Suns also seem to have multiple ways that they can do at least fairly well. Almost all seem to go at least fairly heavy on those Zangor Enlightened with the Great Bows. Seems that not every army takes Magnus though, more Zangors, or all the way up to 3 Mutalith Beasts. They maybe feel like some of the more different ones about this one. Next up, we've got the Emperor's Children, and balance changes don't really seem to have hindered them in any big way. They had their Winged Demon Princes and the Noise Marines and Lucius go up in points slightly. though it still looks like Emperor's Children have been doing great at all manner of tournaments, including winning the biggest one of the last weekend, with John Lennon of Art of War taking first at the Edmonton Open, the really big Games Workshop one in Canada, with over 250 players. Emperor's Children move really fast with the options to advance and shoot and advance and charge with a few restrictions, and this one again uses the coterie of the Conceited, the big damage buff one where you make pledges to Slaanesh as to how many units that you can destroy. And if you can manage to keep your warlord safe, you can rack up progressive damage buffs, reroll ones to hit and wound within at least fairly easy strike reach, and they're pretty great for the Noise Marines, and melee things get significantly better towards the later ones if you can get that far. Otherwise there's some fairly nice melee manipulation options, including re-rolling or hit rolls for one of them, or forcing your opponents to attack one specific thing. You can manipulate the pledge scores as well if you happen to slay more than you'd expected to, and they've got an Armour of Contempt equivalent too, which is usually handy to have. Emperor's Children don't have an enormous roster, so quite a lot of these units are pretty similar to what was being run before. Maybe the biggest difference is that there's a pair of Mauler Fiends in this list. They already seemed like solidly usable units previously, though it seemed that just not many people chose to take them over Winged Demon Princes or Lord Exultant with Infractor combos. Compared with maybe the slightly more cookie-cutter Emperor's Children list before, there's one less Winged Demon Prince and one less Lord Exultant with Infractors to make way for the Mauler Fiends. Talking of those though, the Winged Demon Princes are pretty scary. They move fast, can impact with a whole bunch of mortal wounds. One has Unholy Fortune for some dice manipulation, and the other is the Warlord. And then there's the two squads of Scouting Infractors with their Dueling Sabres, accompanied by the Lord Exultants. They get a bunch of attacks with their Power Spear and Rapture Lash, give the unit lethal hits, and have a big go turn where they get extra AP and far more attacks. The Infractors can make them reroll wound rolls against things on objectives, and if you can get the hit roll buff early in the game, that just adds to the sheer amount of carnage. With the sheer amount of stacked buffs on them, they should be able to take down most things on the mid-board objectives fairly well. Then there's 3 sets of Noise Marines with Blastmasters. I'd guess some of those hitching rides in the Chaos Rhinos. Still seems that 145 points is still worth the premium to pay that. For some very solid general purpose fire support, this will be very dangerous against medium infantry. There's a Lord Cacophonist that could either lead one squad or go it solo. Lucius the Eternal at 150 points now for a lone operative with really quite a chunky amount of damage and defense. And then finally 2 squads of Tormentors, the Infiltrate unit with sticky objectives. Pretty hard to go wrong with a couple of units in any one list to help with screening and claiming points. Overall, there's certainly still loads to fear about the Emperor's Children, and it doesn't look like a few increases to Winged Princes have hurt them too badly at all. Initially maybe doesn't look like Flawless Blades or Fulgrim are making any more appearances than normal though. Next up we've got the World Eaters, and they again still seem to be doing rather well, winning a tournament and placing second from the first 2 from the balance update. And they also had some good success this week. Several high placing lists, including this one by Fraser Perry, who placed 5th at Games Workshop's Edmonton tournaments, again going the first 6 unbeaten. This one's using the Berserker Warband, so that's +1 attack and +2 strength on the charge. Some really nice stratagems to support Khorne Berserkers themselves, a big blood surge and advance and charge for them, an extra AP and melee option, and a sticky objectives on unit death, which is handy for expendable units dying on points to enemy fire. There are 2 squads of Khorne Berserkers in this one, though just the one Rhino to transport them. I guess that means that either some are foot slogging, or there could be some shenanigans as to jumping a squad into the Rhino as the other one gets out. One unit's led by Kharn the Betrayer, and then another one's led by a Master of Executions with a favourite of Khorne. I guess you would want that one to stay out of a Rhino ideally. Moving up alongside them, as big scary melee threats, there's a good chunk of 8-bound, 2 sets of 3 of the regular variety. They can scout up and their damage is really quite general purpose, particularly with the detachment buffs and any stratagems that you give them. And then there's a particularly big and nasty unit of the Exalted 8-bound. They'll get the anti-keywords and should be a pretty nasty, horrendous threat against anything that they charge. There's also a Slaughterbound as well, which will lead one unit of them, and he takes the Berserker Glaive. I'd guess he might go with one of the regular units, as it just sort of feels like overkill to add him into the Exalted squad. Though I guess if he went there, at least he'd maybe have more chance of regenerating 8-bound from the squad not getting fully wiped. Either way, he's a pretty monstrous threat in his own right with that Berserker Glaive on the go, particularly in the turn when he activates his big damage buff. Also to move up alongside them, there's a Demon Prince on foot. He'll be a lone operative and can hand out some free stratagems to nearby World Eaters. He has the Helm of Brazen Ire to make him more survivable. There's 2 Forge Fiends with the triple ectoplasma cannons with their big rapid fire, and some pretty brutal anti-vehicle and anti-elite shooting. And then a good amount of objective support units, 1 squad of Jackals with their sticky objectives, and then 3 individual units of 2 Chaos Spawn. They can move up the board seriously quickly and threaten charges a massive distance away. and could be a good unit to hold objectives and then sticky them when they get shot down. Looks like a great example of what the Berserker Warband can do. Mostly seems pretty well in line with what other people have been playing for it. The big Exalted 8-bound unit is an interesting one though. Next up we've got the Chaos Knights, and frustratingly Games Workshop hasn't given us the points cost for them yet. I suppose they'll probably turn up this week. Plenty of people have been playing some games at the new lower points cost that'll be the case for the big Knights, but for events and tournaments Games Workshop haven't published any points costs officially yet, so most people are still using the index there. I feel like people will be looking forward to seeing more big Knights on the board from the Codex points, though I guess we'll likely be waiting a week or two before those hit tournaments in a big way. From the index though, one list that did well recently was this one by Austin Stevenson, placing 5th at Falcon Summer Open with 4 wins to 1 loss. The vast majority of Chaos Knight army lists have typically tended to be Wardog spam, sometimes with a big Knight of one sort or another in support, though I've not really seen people use the Knight Tyrant recently, generally considered to be one of the weaker data sheets in the Codex, but it seems that while it's still got its massive stats, it's had one good run here, and it's with the loadout with the sort of Valiant one with the Dark Flame Big Flamer, the massive Harpoon, taking some Geist Strike missiles, and he takes the Lord of Dread enhancement, maybe just as a points filler, but giving some battle shocks in melee might actually be disruptive to enemies trying to damage it. The rest of the list is all War Dogs though. There's a War Dog Stalker who takes the Traitor's Mark for the sticky objectives, that one has a Chain Talon and Slaughter Claw, then 3 War Dog Brigands for the Ballistic Skill 2 plus heavy fire support, nice scary firepower between the Chain Cannons with extra AP against the closest target, and the Big Melter. The War Dogs all get Havoc Pods as well to threaten a fairly significant amount of damage one indirect fire that could be bad for certain armies like Eldar. And then of course there's 6 War Dog Carnivores, massive damage output, fast moving and useful enough on objectives, kind of impossible to go too far wrong with, and it still looks like they're going to be very strong into the new Knight Codex. I'll certainly be looking forward to talking through some new Chaos Knight army lists when Games Workshop releases the points. Certainly cool to see someone making a Tyrant work in the meantime though. Finally for Chaos, we've got the Forces of the Gods themselves, and the Chaos Demons are still looking like they're in a strong point after the balance update. Their Shadow Legion took a few nerfs to some of the good enhancements, but broadly for an army on the upper end of the power spectrum that it didn't really get hit too hard. This list by Jake Chalmers was used to take second at the Edmonton Open, the really big 250 player one, going 7-1 and only losing in the final. Demon Incursion is the detachment with the Shadow of Chaos and the Zones of Control that also get projected by the Greater Demons, at least for ones of their own deity. Options to return to reserve, and that concerning close deep strike stratagem that you can still charge from, allowing demons just to warp onto the board and go in with the charges that they most enjoy. Leading the list are a trio of Great Unclean ones, 2 regular ones with Bilesword and Bileblade. They got a lot scarier for their damage profiles when the demons had their big index redo, and if anything they're even tougher than they used to be with their aura of +1 toughness, and one of course takes Endless Gift for the massive Feel No Pain. Most armies will have big problems trying to destroy even one of those. There's also Rottages as well with his interesting damage profile and his different debuffs, and all of those could be potentially interesting to be deep strike charging. Certainly could be problematic to have massive walls of decaying flesh deep striking into the enemy deployment zone. Then for objective support, there's a unit of 10 Plague Bearers for their sticky objectives, 2 individual beasts for scouting and being nuisance units. They're good for positional fights, as if they take chip damage, then they can just fully regenerate. And interestingly, for some fighting melee units in the midboard, there's 2 Wardog Carnivores as well, moving fast and hitting very hard for damage output. Finally, for objective things, there's a Fleshhound unit as well, able to leap on and off the board to warp around doing secondaries. The other very scary damage dealer thing for the list, though, are 2 units of 6 Blood Crushers and then a Ren Master on a Blood Throne. Again, they potentially could be using close deep strike to make charges exactly where they want to. Potentially the chance to even wipe out entire squads with a good roll on their mortal wound impact hits, and then consolidate into something else. The Ren Master is able to mark one target for destruction, giving you bonus strength, AP and damage against any one target, so those Blood Crushers should absolutely annihilate something. Those units definitely look intimidating, and then to back them up, there's those very efficient Great Unclean ones to stomp towards objectives, be too hard to kill, and grind away at the enemy army with some alright damage. With close deep strikes and warping around the table, Demon Incursion definitely feels like a very unsettling detachment to play. Next up we've got the Aeldari, and they were perhaps some of the biggest losers of the balanced data slate, with their Inari getting hit very hard indeed, several staple units going up in costs, and then rules nerfs to Evrain and her detachment. Still seems that the Crash World players haven't been doing terribly on the tabletop this weekend though, even if way less stand out than Inari, and one list that did well was this one at the Iberian Ham Open by Tequila RIP, winning 4 games out of 5. The Aeldari have their battle focus for big movement options both in sequence and out of it, and then Aspect Host gives you some direct damage rerolls, a nice shooting buffing stratagem and the option to jump in and out of Wave Serpents, and several of their options also support the Avatar of Cain as well, which I haven't really seen too many people use in strong lists since the Codex came out, but it seems that it's had some alright success here. To give you a big strong centerpiece to the army, nice and tough to take down with his durability rules, some bonus damage from the detachment, and could be helped getting there with the battle focus. Otherwise there's Eldrad Ulthuan who can farm some command points, I guess maybe just hiding out of line of sight if there's no unit for him to join here. And then there's Fugan and a pair of Autarchs leading a bunch of Aspect Warriors. Fugan looks like he'd be within the big unit of 10 Fire Dragons. It could be a good option to jump out of the Wave Serpent for some extra threat. Ridiculous amounts of anti-tank damage dealing there between him and the rest of the squad's firepower. There's also a unit of 10 Dark Reapers as well with a missile launcher. They seem like they'd be a good one to lead with an Autarch to get them some cheap stratagems. There's another smaller unit of 5 Fire Dragons for more anti-tank. 2 units of 5 Howling Banshees that can move very fast and charge, still apparently worth the investment here despite the points rise. 3 squads of 5 Rangers for some expendable units that can infiltrate, and then 3 units of Warp Spiders, some nice shooting with their Death Spinners, and with Flicker Jump that 24-inch range move is pretty massive. Both can be good for striking at enemies that would otherwise be hidden and doing secondary objectives when it makes sense to maybe late game. Seems that most people went for Aspect Host for the Aeldari as a pivot from Inari. Looks like there were plenty trying out War Host if that's going to be one of the biggest movement shenanigan ones once again, and Seer Council still got some interest too. For the Drukhari, they got some small helpful boosts from the points changes, and also getting a reroll ones to hit on the side that's winning the wager all the time. It certainly doesn't seem like any bad thing for Reaper's wager, which already looked like it was the most successful of the Drukhari detachments. Looks like Archon Skari from Scarredcast has managed to do very well from them in the tournament straight after as well, taking 4th at the Edmonton Open and going 7 wins and 1 loss. Looks like he has used the Reaper's wager here. So in theory the Allied Harlequin detachment, though it looks like there's just the one Death Jester for some lone operative utility. Even with the Drukhari winning the wager, it still means that they'll now get reroll ones to hit basically all game long, and the main strength of the detachment more feels like it's in the stratagems anyway. There's lots of nice stuff to deliver things to melee, advance and charge, turning off Overwatch, a Fights in Death one on a 4+, and a nice increase in damage with Malicious Frenzy. The list has got a whole ton of unit diversity. There's an Archon with Arc Raider, giving his unit Scout, so you can have him with the unit that he's leading zooming up the board very quickly. There's 2 Beastmasters that can scout up in a big way as well. Drazar, who I'd guess would lead the squad of Incubi in a Venom potentially. He can make them hit a fair bit harder. There's Lilith Hesprax leading a big squad of 10 Witches on foot, and Urian Rakarth, who could go along with the Grotesques, though it's just pretty handy to have on his own, with a tough stat line and the ability to stand up on death. Then I'd guess in the Venoms there'd probably be more Kabbalite warriors, as they can use these sticky objectives to zoom from point to point and use that there. There's 2 squads of Mandrakes that can infiltrate to hold the mid-board and screen back, or just use their fadeaway to warp around the board doing secondary objectives. A Kronos can be used to recycle some pain tokens, potentially from the shooting units. There's a Ravager with Dark Lances, and then 2 squads of Scourges with their jump shoot jump, one with Dark Lances and one with Haywire. And then for some other general purpose melee threats moving towards the mid-board, there's 2 squads of Grotesques with Liquefy guns that could skirmish very well with lighter enemy infantry, and a big squad of Hellions that could be a nice target for stratagems. Overall a pretty crazy amount of unit diversity and big options for someone who knows the faction inside out. Certainly no big surprise to see Skari doing well with Drukhari once again. Next up we have the Tyranids. They got a whole bunch of small changes in the balanced data slate, most of it fairly fun though, and they got their Subterranean Assault detachment. Does look like there's a fair few people experimenting with that one. It does seem to have a bit more success than people using the Wrath of the Rock detachment. Plenty of love for the usual staples though, and this one by Thomas Harkstead was used to take 3rd at the Adeptus Custodes tournament, going 4-1 at a 31 player event, and using Crusher Stampedes, the one for the monsters. That one gives you extra OC while the monsters are uninjured, and then damage buffs if they are. It's also got some nice support stratagems, all basically tied to monster datasheets, things to smash through walls, and a few more damage and utility things. The list is led by a now cheaper Hive Tyrant, but only with the 1 free stratagem per battle round, not 2. He takes the Bone Sword and Venom Cannon, though does clock in at less than 200 points now. And there's also a Neuro Tyrant as well, fairly efficient in their own right with their big Torrent attack. They can help keep things in Synapse range if they need to. They give you the big single debuff for the Shadow in the Warp, making it more likely that a bunch of enemy units will actually fail Battle Shock. He has Ominous Presence as well, so a little bit more objective control, maybe as a points filler. so I guess he's got an unusual amount of weight on objectives while he's undamaged. For the mainline damage dealers of the list though, there's 3 Exocrines that get on well with the Hive Tyrant's lethal hits aura. They'll be able to spot some targets for rerolls. For the rest of the monstrous firepower though, if you're focusing stuff down, there's also 2 Tyrannofexes with Rupture Cannons too, so brutal hard-hitting anti-tank, they're anything that you can get direct line of sight to. Then for frontline bugs, there's a Norn Emissary that can point itself towards a central objective and get some big objective control and toughness there. A Maleceptor that's got some nice general purpose firepower and is pretty tough on the front lines with its invulnerable save and debuff rule, and a Haruspex for some fairly cheap and punchy melee. Then to support them, there's some very minimal other units, a single Biovore for spawning out some spore mines to screen out the enemy and maybe mess around with advances, a Near Elictor potentially to make the most of some good battle shock debuffs for some extra damage for the monsters against marked targets, and then not one but a trio of Lictors, really efficient lone operatives with free rapid ingress and infiltrate. They're really hard to go too far wrong with for a whole variety of purposes between their utility, damage and defense. Sheer amount of wounds and massive monstrous damage still can get the job done for the Tyranids, even if they aren't quite so commonly played this way versus Invasion's fleet, and people are all very excited about the Borrowers. Next up, for their insidious cultist allies, we've got the Genestealer Cults, again a faction with a slightly lower player base. One list that did well for them was at the Leeds team tournament, this one played by Sam Parker-Holly, going 5-0. Again, a bit different to singles tournament armies, maybe particularly for unusual lists like Genestealer Cults, but this one looks like a fairly takes-all-comers Biosantic Broodsurge melee monster fest to me. Biosantic Broodsurge is the one that makes charges just a little bit easier. Aberrants, Biophages and Pure Strain Genestealer units get +1 to charge, and then extra attacks on the charge, and they've got a bunch of good stratagem support for those units, potentially buffing charge range further, so you might be able to get in more reliably from reserve. There's a 1 command point for wounding better against monsters and vehicles, potentially some damage on death for Abominants and Patriarchs, and some options for manipulating Pile-In and Consolidate. Leading the list is a Patriarch with the Biomorph adaptation, that will give him some damage 3 melee attacks and make him super punchy. He'll likely be leading one of the 3 5-strong Pure Strain Genestealer units that can infiltrate, so potentially some big threats early on, and they're very cheap to recycle with the Resurgence points now. It just costs 2 of them to put them back into reserve. There's then 3 Abominants, I'd guess leading the 3 units of 5 Aberrants. There'll be pretty nice general purpose melee threats between them. One of them has Predatory Instincts, the one that can allow you to infiltrate up the board. Pretty nasty to be getting Aberrant muscle so far forward quite so early. And then for the mainstay of the detachment units, there's then 2 Biophages. Looks like they'd be joining a hybrid Metamorph squad, a big unit of them with the Hand Flamers, and then a squad of 10 Acolytes with heavy mining tools. Between the Biophages buffs and the detachment ones, both of those get far scarier here. One of the 2 appear to be hitching a ride in a Goliath truck. Then for objective support, there's 2 more small units of 5 Acolytes and 1 unit of 10 Neophytes. Nice to have options for sticky objectives and command point farming between them, as well as just some expendable units to do secondaries and things. 2 lone operatives in support, the Sanctus for a little bit of sniping, and the Reductus Saboteur for the potential big yield explosives in the right situation. And then 2 Achilles Ridge Runners to support the big damage dealer units with a heavy mortar and spotter. They'll be able to hand out extra AP against the things getting charged. Pretty nasty in combination with just about any of the melee damage dealers in this detachment. Certainly looks like there's lots to worry about in this list, and it'll be kind of hard to catch up with a good chunk of it. It seems like quite a lot of good options to get them there with the boosted charges and maybe rapid ingress. Next up we've got the Necrons. They were doing fairly well prior to the update, then if anything they got a fair few interesting points changes. Drops to units like Illuminor Seraz, and perhaps particularly the Canoptek Wraiths and Technomancer were maybe a little bit surprising. This army list is using the Awakened Dynasty, and it was run by Lassatil Rem, placing first at the Adeptus Bastardes tournament, going 5 wins undefeated. Awakened Dynasty is the one that gives you +1 to hit for leader combos, and then a bunch of really powerful stratagems that work better on things with leaders. In particular, the reactive reanimation one is quite nice, and there's the ability to get a character back up when they've been slain the first time for 1 command point as well. The list is headed up by Zarek the Silent King himself. He's big, tough and threatening in his own right and brings some nice rerolls to the table. It looks like he's joined by a whole clutch of individual powerful characters. Ekatan Shard the Nightbringer for some sheer raw might that could work well with the Canoptek Reanimator. Illuminor Seraz as a fairly mighty lone operative. Doesn't look like he's buffing anything at all in terms of battle line here, and just being carried by his raw stats. A Scorpet Lord who went up in cost, as did the Enagic Dermal Bond, that gives him the Feel No Pain. It still looks like he's being considered worth the investment alongside a squad of Scorpet Destroyers. He'd be particularly painful to get up again and deal more damage and have to destroy all over again. And then finally there's a Technomancer with a squad of Canoptech Braves. They were already a staple unit with their 5+ Feel No Pain and big chunky stat lines with good options for regeneration. Getting even cheaper makes them even more tempting. Beyond the characters, there's a Doomsday Arc to provide a bit of heavy fire support that could back up Zarek and his Annihilation Beams, and then a fair few smaller objective support squads, some infiltration with some flayed ones, a unit of 5 Triarch Praetorians that can at least move around fairly fast, and then interestingly a set of 2 Crypto Thralls. I'd guess they'd probably join the Technomancer and the Wraiths in a sort of unusual combo. They're only movement 5, so they could have the potential to slow the unit down a fair bit or mean that they need to be chained out. Could be a big investment way to make a squad even more annoyingly durable though, with them catching some big hitting damage that might be destined for the Wraiths otherwise. Certainly seems like a very character heavy Awakened dynasty though. I guess there'd be good use of the Revive on Death stratagem with Illuminor Seraz and the Scorpet Lord, plenty of command points flowing with Imatech around, and the Canoptech Reanimator to make good use of the reactive reanimation one. Next up, we've got the Space Wars with the Leagues of Votann. No major changes aside from some transport restrictions lifted in the balance update. I think a lot of people just mainly waiting for their codex coming later in the year. They feel like they've been in a good, solidly well-balanced spot for quite some time now. Most of their data sheets are really quite usable, though they don't have crazy amounts to fall back on. This army list by Tom Green was used to take first at Sunshine Coast Open, taking 5 wins to no losses against a 30-player tournament, with the Leagues of Votann core rules marking their units for judgment tokens, and then their index detachment having quite a lot of nice ways to add raw damage and defense, and support their units as they take down big enemy targets. Leading the army here is a Brockhere Ironmaster with grim demeanour. I'd guess he'd be joining that big unit of Thunderkin with the Grav Cannons. He can give them +1 to hit and allow them to ignore modifiers, and repair injured ones as well. They're really quite powerful and general purpose, though their short range could be an issue. Then for the mainstay of the list, there's loads of units in Sagittars, 5 sets of them with high-las beam cannons for some dedicated anti-tank, and they can scout to get those in range or maybe hide from the enemy turn 1. It looks like 3 of those have Chthonian Berserks in them, and the other 2 are used to split 2 squads of 10 Hearthkin Warriors in half, giving you a bunch of small expendable units that can have sticky objectives. Then there's a big single land fortress with the heavy SP conversion beamer plus some bolt cannons. That's a potentially nice one for their void armor stratagem or returning fire. There's 10 Hernkin Jaegers infiltrating into the midboard and allowing the Votann to guarantee that they can do their scouting when they want to, and then quite a good number of Hernkin Pioneers as well. 1 big unit of 6 with the high-las rotary cannon, and then 2 units of 3. They could be fairly nice options to destroy outlying units and trigger that big command point reward. Overall, certainly looks like a really solid Leagues of Votann list, maybe a similar kind of look and feel to quite a lot of their Oathbound armies out there, though hopefully the codex might give them a little bit more variety. Next up, we've got the Tau Empire, who got some interesting changes in the balance update. The big rewrite of their army rule certainly helps out with the efficiency of unit spotting. It means that 1 unit can spot for the rest of the army to focus that unit down, which is really helpful, and losing the split fire penalty doesn't hurt either. For one example of a Tau list that did well, this one by Brandon Valley was used to take 4th at the Falcon tournament with 4 wins and 1 loss, and it's using the Kauyon detachment that was specifically nerfed in the balance update. It swapped from guided units getting sustained hits to ignoring modifiers for the bonus buff that gives them, which definitely isn't unhelpful, and the sustained hits is still really big, though it still seems that plenty of people are choosing to put that one specifically on the tabletop. It's still got some good support stratagems, and the big damage buff of sustained hits 1 is still nice enough for Tau. It might be an army that gets on well with challenger cards if the opponent goes ahead early on and then Kauyon comes back really strong towards the end of the game. In any case, this one's led into battle by Shadowson, a helpful lone operative with rerolls, some personal damage, and a chance to farm command points. And for main damage punches of the list, there's 2 Riptides with iron accelerators with their good defensive stats and the ability to fall back and shoot, 3 Skyray gunships for some more anti-heavy tank kind of firepower with those Seeker missile arrays, and then 2 units of Fire Warrior Breachers, taking Guardian drones and gun drones and loaded into Devilfish, with the ability to get out and hit incredibly hard against things on midfield objectives. They can be guided by a couple of units of stealth suits, now costing a bit more but still getting reroll 1s to hit and wound, potentially buffing an entire army at a time is rather nice. And finally, for main damage punches, there's a Coalstar Commander with missiles, Cyclic Ion and high output burst cannon. It seems that he is joining a unit of Starscythe Crisis suits with burst cannons for a fast moving infantry deletion unit, and he takes the Exemplar of Kauyon, getting the sustained hits rule for his unit 1 turn early. Then there's 2 Skirmishing Piranhas with fusion blasters, nice expendable units to put in the midboard. 2 Cadre Fireblades to buff the Breachers and give them far more threat when they're jumping out of the Devilfish and punching down enemy units in the midboard. There's a unit of Vespid Stingwings to jump on and off the board and do secondary objectives, and finally there's Dark Strider, just being fielded on his own here it would seem. 65 points for a bubble of denying 12-inch deep strike, could be handy enough to park on the home objective to keep it safe. Overall looks like a very nicely balanced list with a good mix of buffing units, heavy firepower, and plenty of things to help with the objective game. So far it looks at least like the rules changes genuinely helped out Tau armies, and certainly doesn't seem like Cao Yon has been hurt too badly by the nerf to it. Still seems that Tau have pretty good internal balance for the different attachments you might want to take. Finally we've got the Orks, and Games Workshop suddenly took some chunks out of them in the points updates that they had. Lots of staples to more competitive Ork armies going up a small amount, which was perhaps a bit surprising for a faction that didn't really seem to be riding too high recently, not since the big nerfs that they gave out to more Daka. Some of the last changes hit a fair bunch of tournament staples, both things like trucks and tank busters that were in a lot of lists, but also certain popular ranged combos as well. It seems like Orks had a pretty bad weekend last time. I struggled to find too many top placing lists. It seems that Warhorde's remaining perhaps the most popular, and the highest placing Orks list at the Edmonton Open of the big 250 player ones was this one by Darren Jack, who went 6 wins to 2 losses over the course of the event. This one's playing Warhorde with the sustained hits in melee, a good amount of melee violence, and stratagems that can make it easier for your infantry to get into combat, hit harder when they get there, and potentially be -1 to wound. The majority of the army is all piling it into 5 trucks. Looks like there's a beast boss with beast snagger boys that can hit ridiculously hard against enemy tanks and monsters. 3 sets of 5 knobs, each led up by a war boss, really big hitting damage in the war for those units. I guess the bosses are joining the knobs in any case. Another possibility could be the breaker boys with their smash hammers and their big anti-vehicle keywords. There's 2 units of 6 of those as well, and then there's some shooting options as well within the trucks. 1 squad of burner boys, 1 squad of flash gits, and 1 squad of tank busters. I'd guess the tank busters might be led by the big mech with the shock attack gun. He seems like a slightly unusual choice in Warhorde, particularly given the context of him going up in points. Then there's some commandos infiltrating into the midboard and paying a premium to get there, and a bit of Orky objective support, 2 sets of 5 storm boys to jump around, deep strike and do objectives, and 1 squad of 11 Gretchen, always doing their duty and winning the games, farming up some command points. I guess it remains to be seen how well Orks do in general from now, but certainly with the first few results it isn't looking super positive for them. They did get surprisingly harsh changes of really quite a middling win rate, even if a few people have been doing well at some big events with them from time to time. With the Xenos armies talked about though, that's about it for this one. Let me know your thoughts on any of the army lists featured, and in particular any interesting things about how they play that I might not know about. I'll certainly look forward to any insights down in the comments. Before I go, I'll just cycle back to Warhammer Combat Cards, the sponsor of this video. As mentioned earlier, one option for a Warhammer 40,000 themed mobile game, if you did want something to pass a bit of time while on the go or in breaks. I've tried the game myself for a while, and there are plenty of things that I liked about it quite a lot. It does feel fairly stress-free in the sense of fairly constant progression, never really losing anything in an enormous way, and more of the focus being on how to win the next battle and reach the next goal, usually with fairly short and punchy games that can be nice for a short distraction, but you don't have to commit crazy amount of time to any one run of them. There is some genuine strategy, trying out some different builds, and a little bit of scope for intelligent play using the abilities of the warlords and things. And certainly there'll be a lot more high-level play that I don't understand at my sort of level of messing around with it. For criticisms, the main one is that it is of course a mobile free-to-play game and has these sort of things that you probably expect to go with that. If you don't like mobile games, it's probably not going to be for you. I'd go in with expecting a bit of fun entertainment and not so much more than that. The strategy is maybe a little bit on the limited side with the actual matchups, mainly about trying to counter cards deployed opposite you. It's more about the deck building than the in-game play. It can be a bit grindy, which isn't exactly a terrible thing in a mobile game in my opinion. There is of course the inevitable microtransaction shop, though I personally never use those sort of things in mobile games just on principle. Like a bunch of them, I'm sure you could pay to succeed faster, but that kind of defeats the point a bit for me. I think there's enough here that you can get some entertainment from it without spending money. They do have new content coming out really quite regularly. They aim to release new cards and updates in step with Games Workshop's release schedule. They've had ones coming out in tandem with the codexes earlier this year, the latest one being a release for Magnus. There's quite a lot of content to go at, with over 1,000 cards in-game. In any case, thanks to them for sponsoring the video, and you can check them out, links down in the video description if you'd like to. There's that code, the red, as in Magnus the Red, if you want some bonus Chaos cards on sign-up. I'll leave that one there for now though. Let me know your thoughts on the 40k army lists, and feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming with new ones out just about every day. If you've been enjoying all the videos on the channel, then check out the channel's Patreon page or the affiliate discount links in the video description if you'd like to help support. A big thank you to anyone helping out there. Otherwise though, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.